Hi everyone, this is Sharon. Today I have a project to share with you. This is my design team project for Lidia for June, but it's also a collaboration between Lidia, Jaizella of Lavish Laces, and myself. So Jaizella approached our design team and asked if we would be interested in using some of the items from her shop to use in a collaborative project, and we all thought that was a fantastic idea. So she sent us each a kit or a box of items, and it was filled with things like laces and trims and ribbons and some paper ephemera. My box had some photos and postcards and ledger paper in it. So I tried to include as much of those items as possible in here, along with Lidia's beautiful digitals. Now I will put links to both their shops down in the description so you can check those out. For Lidia's digitals, I used primarily her Yellow Rose collection for this journal. I have a feeling that this last month, almost all of the design team probably had something yellow on their work surface because her Yellow Rose collection is absolutely gorgeous. And so I've been working with that over the last few weeks. I'll go through a little bit more detail of the items that I used in here once I get into the journal. For the front, I tied it up with this kind of mauvey, purpley, sari silk ribbon, and then I also embellished it with a few little charms. This one, and this is a charm that my husband made. He made a number of these for me. They are from a silverware set that belonged to my in-laws, and so I just think they turned out really wonderfully. And this is, I said sari silk, but it's actually a chiffon kind of a ribbon. It's a little bit sheer. I just wrapped that around a few times. I used this beautiful old vintage book that I got from my friend Connie. I love the gold and the brown trim on here, some nice pattern detail. And this is the back. I didn't so much care for the picture on the front, and so I just took one of Lidia's beautiful images from one of her journal pages and put that on the front. So heading on inside, for the inside covers, I used images from Lidia's Neutral Ephemera kit. And this one I just trimmed up with a little bit of trim. Now this is from my stash. This is not from Jaizella. I'll kind of point out which ones are hers and which ones aren't, but primarily, mostly all of them are hers. And then this is what I've got on the back. And then for my spine, I've got this nice kind of brown and gold and blue floral fabric. So heading on inside to the pages, on this first page, I used this ephemera piece of Lidia's. It's a framed picture, and this kind of ladder type lace I got from Jaizella. So I used that to hang the picture, and then I just did some slow stitching around the outside of it, added a button, and let me get this up a little bit. Some ribbon to the bottom, and then that flips up and there's another image underneath. So we can do a little bit of secret journaling under there. On this page, I'll try to remember to show you some of these beautiful background pages. She's got wallpaper kits and other background papers in her Yellow Rose collection. That's one of them. And then from Jaizella, I used one of her vintage photos and this old French postcard or some type of a card. Here I incorporated a vintage book page of mine and just did some punching along the edge. Here I used one of Lidia's tags to embellish my pocket along with some lace. And then in there I used some of her tags. I think this is from a spring or Easter kit, these two tags. And I just kind of punched them and hung them together with some string. And then I've also got a fabric, ticking fabric, and some writing paper in there. And just did a little stamping and lined these with some ledger paper. Another one of her beautiful images. And then here in the center of the signature, I used this really wide lace from Jaizella and used that as my belly bands. And then on my strings, I just used a little bit of decorative paper for some little dangles on there. And then I created these two tags. So these are from one of the neutral kits, I think, not the Rose collection. Added some lace on there and back these onto some painter's masking paper. And then on the back, I just added some vintage paper for writing. And then for the tabs at the top, I used some vintage French fabric. Just added some string on there. Here again, I've got another pocket on this page. And in there, I just created this little faux calling card. It was an old envelope that was kind of folded in half. It was kind of an offcut. I've embellished or embossed this top panel and then just added a little signature stamp on the inside. And then here's just a piece of ledger paper. I added this floral sticker to it. And then this is a nice old postcard from Jaizella. On this page, I clipped this tag that I made, added a little fabric for the tab at the top. And that's the other side of that pretty paper. Here on this page, I just embellished it with a little bit of punched paper. And then this is a book page from a book. I just love this image, Mother and Child, it says. And then left some writing room here and just stamped on the top of it. On this page, I embellished with this little cheesecloth label. I just stamped onto that. And then on this side of the page, another beautiful background. I don't work with yellows a lot, but it was really enjoyable. The soft colors in here are really pretty. I just love them. Here I made this little squishy booklet. Jaizella had these kind of onion skin ledger papers in her box, and so I took a couple of those and folded them up and just created kind of a squishy cover stitched around it to hold everything together. And then just did a little collaging with some of Lidia's images, and then added some paper or lace in here, and then some offcut papers to use for journaling. And then in this back cover, I just created this little side tuck. And this was a photo that was in Jaizella's kit. It's got some nice, beautiful French writing on the back, dated 1929. So I thought that would be fun to journal on that. And the front, I didn't care so much for the image, so I just thought I would stencil over the top of the whole thing. And it just provided a nice backdrop on there. Here on this side of the page, I again used some of her beautiful laces to trim the pocket and used an old book page for my journal page. And then here I took one of Lidia's images, this kind of album image, and then I created a little pocket there and just added some of my pressed lavender in there. And then that's backed onto this vintage lotto card, and I just added a floral sticker on this side. Here in the center of this signature, I added some washi tape for reinforcement. That's from Lace Boutique 1. And then I created a couple of tags to go in there. So I kind of inverted them. If I'm kind of clipping them to the top, I like to put the tabs at the bottom with some ribbon. And so these are some botanical images of Lidia's. And I just backed it with some wax paper. And then this one. Here in this pocket, I took an image from one of her poppy kits to create this tag, and then just backed it with some piano roll paper. Here I've got a vintage canceled check, and then I took one of her digitals, this library card, added a tab at the top, and then just added some coffee dyed paper to the back. Here again, I just did a little bit of embellishment. These pages are so pretty. I just stamped on some cloth and added that to the page. And then on this side, I've got this shorthand page from a book. And then clipped on there, I've got this full envelope. So I made that from an old dictionary page. And then this is the image on the back. Another botanical image. I just folded these corners in to kind of create the envelope style. Did some stenciling on the inside and then added this kind of metal filigree piece on the flap. And then in there, I just tucked this vintage postcard from Jaizella and added this little French laundry label on there. Here on this page, I embellished with some sari silk ribbon and a wax seal. Here I took some of Jaizella's lace and actually took a strip of paper and wove it through there just to give it a little bit more interest. And then I've got another one of her beautiful old postcards. And I also tucked in this vintage sewing instruction sheet. It's got the nice image of the, I don't know what this, maybe 40s, 50s, something like that, looks like to me. Here is a beautiful old piece of ledger paper from Jaizella that was in her kit. And I just folded that out, and inside of there I tucked this tag that I made. So we got this pretty image. And then this image on this side. I think this is from one of Lidia's boho kits. We got this vintage bird book page on this side. And then here on this page, I did a little bit of stenciling with paste, and then I attached this tag to the page. Here on this page, I just took this beautiful satin ribbon from Jaizella and added a paper button. In the center of this signature, I took this ribbon that was in Jaizella's box. It's this beautiful kind of a blush pink color. And I just attached that like in the corners so that it would create some pockets for me. And then I like the way that blush looks against this beautiful neutral paper of Lidia's. And then in there, I inserted these items. So I just took an old German book page and folded it up to create a holder for my tags. So this is this one, vintage French stamp on there and some lace on the bottom. And then I backed it with this beautiful damask fabric and a label. And then I also trimmed the little pocket with some fabric and lace. And then this one's similar. And then on my strings in this signature, I just added some pretty beads, a crystal bead, some glass beads. Oops, I think I skipped a page. Here we go. Here I just embellished with some of Jaizella's lace on the top and added this kind of a metallic button to the bottom, I guess. This is a page from a floral book that I have. On this page, I've clipped on a couple of journaling spots that I made. So this one, I kind of layered up one of Lidia's images. And I did wax this piece, and it's backed onto some old French book page. And then I just added some decorative stitching on paper to the top of it. And then in the back, I created this top tuck on there. And then in there, I just tucked in a journaling card and some ledger paper. You can still see the pretty French book page underneath. And then this one. Here on this page, this was actually like a negative, picture negative that Jaizella had in her box. And I thought, how can I use that? I wanted to challenge myself to use just about everything in her box. So I just thought I would take that and stitch it to the page and use it as corner tuck. And so I just added a label on there. And then in there I tucked one of her vintage photos. Got some nice old writing on the back. And then this vintage piece of handwriting. I just really like the way this kind of browny gray colored negative looks with the yellows and the kind of neutral colors. Here on this page I just embellished with some embossed paper at the top, and then here I've got a music sheet for my page, and I just added a fabric ruffle and a little bit of lace on top. Here was another thing I challenged myself with. So Jaizella had this kind of, I don't know, it kind of tarnished silver rickrack. And that's something I would never think to pick up and use in a journal, but I decided I have to find a place for it. And so I put it on the edge of this old music paper on the side tuck. And I just really love the way it looks with all the neutral tones in here, the yellows and the greens, and I think it turned out pretty nice. So in there, I tucked this little journaling card. Just used one of Lidia's images and backed it onto some ledger paper. And then this also was in Jaizella's box. It looked to me like an old folio for maybe photo slides or photo negatives. This was the outside. The inside was the outside. But I flipped it this way so that the pockets were easier to use. And then I just put some journaling cards into those pockets, this side and this side. And then on my cards, I use these vintage Denison labels. They're kind of like fabric labels. And then what was the outside that now is the inside had some kind of bright, I hated to cover them up, but it was very bright red graphics on there, and it really didn't go with my project. So I did cover that in some more vintagey looking papers. And then I just tucked in these lined onion skin papers for writing. And then again on this page, I used Jaizella's lace to trim up the page, just add a little texture to it. And I was amazed at how close her lace matched Lidia's digital lace on there. Here on this page, I pulled some trims from one of Lidia's kits to just add a little bit to the page. And then here I've got a piece of vintage wallpaper that I used for my page. I took one of her images and covered it with this mica sheet and added a little bit of lace on there just to dress it up a little bit. I know it's kind of hard to see with my light. And then on the inside of the wallpaper sheet, I took one of the postcards that was in Jaizella's kit, and I liked the writing on the back better than the front even. It's got this deep plum writing, and that went well with the plum ephemera pieces I have, so I just used those as my pockets, and then just added some labels and stamps on there. This actually was an original stamp. It's an Italian postcard, and I just added this label. And then in those pockets, I've got this piece, this lady lounging, and I just added a little ribbon. It's actually a library card, catalog card. So it had the hole in it already, and I just added some of this embossed paper on the side. And then on the backs of the pages, I just did a little stamping. That one, and then this one also. And then here I just made this little piece into a scrappy pad. It's on an old book page. And then I just used one of Lidia's digital images on the front. Here on this page, I again used some of that rickrack metallic trim. And then in there, I tucked in this really old book page from 1838. And this page from a women's magazine, I think, is from the late 1800s. Here I just did a little embellishment with some ribbon and fabric and a full button. And then over on this page, I added this image. I think this was from one of her ephemera kits. And I just cut it out, added some gold edging to it, and put these photo corners on there. There was a pretty image underneath it, but that's the one I used for my front cover, and I don't like to repeat them if I don't have to, so I just found a different one to put on that page. Here I used, again, a lace piece for my belly band. And then in there I tucked in this old French invoice. And this one's dated 1863. And then I also have this old handwritten postcard from 1916. I pulled out a map page of mine, a vintage map that had a lot of the same colors that I used in this journal. And what I did was I folded it up to form some really large pockets on this side, and then just closed the sides with these tab pieces. And then in there I've got this little journaling booklet. So I've just got some old papers, some lace, places to write. And then in the center of this signature, I created some side tucks with these die cut pieces. They're kind of intricate, lacy rectangles. And then on top of the rectangles, I just added some embossed paper to kind of dress them up a little bit. And then in this one, I've got this beautiful rose image from a rose book of mine. I think this is probably my favorite rose image in the whole book. I just love the delicate kind of creamy white and blush pink and a little bit of yellow in there. I think it's so pretty. It's called Ophelia. I just thought it would be a fun place to write on the back, so I added a stamp to the top. And then I took a page from that rose book, Outdoor Rose Growing, and just created this little folio that you can use for storing things in. And it's got this old postcard scene on here. I transferred that to this clear shelf liner paper so you can actually see through it. And then this is another one of those images from that women's magazine. Here in this pocket, I've got another booklet that I made. So again, one of Lydia's beautiful images, and then just, again, some old papers and places to write. In this belly band, I've got this beautiful blue and black postcard from Jaizella. Just love the colors in that. Some writing room on the back, and then I just tucked in a piece of ledger paper. And that takes us to our last page. So this journal is available for purchase in my Etsy shop. You can check it out there. I'm so glad you joined me today, and I was very happy to work with both Jaizella and Lidia on this project. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks again, and until next time, bye-bye.